The aim behind Design United was to create an optimistic space for regional dialogue, connections, collaborations, and opportunities for young designers and design practices. A much needed network of support and peer mentorship during these uncertain times. The selected designers and design studios have a deep resonance with the place they are from. They believe in genuinely contributing to the environment and the design community. We have had wonderful young speakers and moderators from the region in the past who have joined us in our conversations. We have had Bogar Studio and Studio Made, Anai Studio, Be Polite, Compartment S4, architect Avinash Ankalge, all from India. We've also had Kavan Balasurya from Sri Lanka and Studio Neba and Kolpa World from Nepal. To share their design approaches and journey. So please continue to join us every week now on revised timings, Saturday, same time at 4:30 p.m. for this conversation. With this background to Design United, let's move to the much anticipated conversation today. I'm delighted to welcome our presenting speakers and designers for this evening, architect Vaissnavi Shukl, joining us from Cambridge, US, and Ishita Shah joining us from Bengaluru. Their presentation will be followed by a moderated discussion. So please do type in audience questions for both Vaishnavi and Ishita, which will be answered in the discussion that will follow the presentation. I would like to introduce the presenting designers for this evening. Vaishnavi Shukl graduated with a Master in Design Studies from the Graduate School of Design at Harvard University yesterday. Congratulations, Vaishnavi. At the GST, she co-chaired the school's largest student organization, Women in Design, which is committed towards advancing gender equity in and through design. Vaishnavi is trained as an architect and received her undergraduate degree in architecture from CEPT University, India. Her master's thesis was on the architectural manifestation of national identity through state-sponsored projects, which she recently presented at the 73rd Society of Architectural Historians Annual Conference. Welcome, Vaishnavi. Our second designer and presenter for this evening is Ishita Shah. Ishita's practice revolves around ideas of curating for culture. She is currently focusing on research in feminist approaches towards community engagement. In collaboration with Biome Environmental Solutions, they are curating an institutional archive and a series of publications. She recently curated a two-part exhibition, Lab Culture, in collaboration with NCBS. She has also co-curated a public engagement, Design Dialogues, where citizens come together and decode a variety of cultural issues through creative approaches. She has been an educator and coordinator to the UNESCO chair at Srishti Institute of Art, Design and Technology. She's also been the founding archivist and oral historian at the CEPT Archives. Welcome, Ishita. Starting the presentation today with Vaishnavi.
Sorry, I'm going to share screen again. Okay. Hi, I'm so excited to be here today. Before I begin, I just wanted to thank ClayWorks Spaces and Design United for this wonderful initiative, especially Priyanka, Simran, and of course, Varna, who I've now known for over 7 years. Thank you for this opportunity. I'm also excited to share this platform with Ishita, who I worked with 5 years ago at the CEPT Archives. It was back then that I got excited about archival material and started to think about, the different ways in which we designers work with. I've also worked with special collections at Harvard since then for the last 2 years. So yeah, just a side note on how exciting all sorts of archival material are. My recent research considers the ways in which nation building and architecture are intertwined in India today. I focus on the ongoing, controversial, and much publicized Central Vista project, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, that was commissioned in September 2019. The project invited architects to imagine the redevelopment of the Parliament building, Common Central Secretariat, and the Central Vista. That is, the 3 kilometer stretch that forms the ceremonial axis of India's capital city. What is remarkable about the 6 video submissions is the pointed exploration of how contemporary architecture attempts to negotiate visual terms for national identity. From a central square unfurled like a lotus flower above which fighter jets zoom, to a sustainable parliament building with a porous steel structure and solar panels. These videos reflect an ideologically potent perception of Indian nationalism. The project has garnered tremendous attention. Furthermore, it has incited strong reactions from a diverse range of stakeholders. I examined the 6 videos, including that of the winning film HCP, a snippet of which is playing right now, in light of current politics, while undertaking an analysis of the representational strategies adopted to express visions for a new India. By foregrounding the formal solutions expressed in filmic terms as a part of this state-sponsored competition, I explore the complex nexus of official architecture, India's colonial past, national identity, and the moving image. Today, I'm focusing on how the idea of a new India is expressed at the scale of the urban landscape and in the conception of a new parliament. The treatment of landscape in the Central Vista project offers a means to negotiate between iconic geographical features and a politically marked built environment. With the Yamuna River in the east, right here, and the Raisina Hill in the west, what was originally envisioned as an ornament to the ceremonial King's Way in the colonial context was organized around a series of gardens, 2 parallel water channels, and rows of trees lining the main axis of the National Avenue. The landscape one sees today is a product of imperial city planning undertaken in the early 20th century, which means that the trees of New Delhi are a British legacy. Where plantings are concerned, trees for the Central Vista were selected by British colonial architect Edwin Lutyens, with the Rai Jamun predominating the Rajpath owing to its large foliage. This choice, as well as the overall layout of vegetation, imbued the Central Vista with the English picturesque tradition. The original intention was to have major avenues point in the direction of a particular feature, like a monument. The Jamun trees then contributed to the pointed directionality of the avenue and served as visual devices to bring monuments into focus. This continues to hold true even today, over 9 decades since their planting, as the Jamun trees frame the colonial structures at either end of Rajpath, with the Rashtrapati Bhavan at the top of the hill and India Gate at the other end. Landscape, therefore, is not only a passive and aesthetic cultural product, but also an active agent in the socio-cultural formation of the city, and an efficient tool for integrating official strategies, ideologies, and values into spatial conditions. The redevelopment of Central Vista offered architects an opportunity to question the role of landscape in the contemporary context and to challenge the colonial conception of a ceremonial avenue as a monumental marker of political power. As the videos underscore, landscape architecture emerges as an integrative constituent of the topography in 3 ways. First, by monopolizing on the visibility of landscape elements in order to exhibit recognizable nationalist symbols. Second, by taking advantage of a sprawling area in order to increase the footprint of accessible public spaces and enhance the overall visual appeal. And third, by utilizing the versatile quality of landscape elements in order to integrate a sustainable and technological infrastructure. In the first approach, architect Hafiz Contractor deploys the lotus, that is, the national flower associated with the Hindu goddess of wealth and prosperity, Lakshmi, to leverage the overly patriotic appeal of their proposal. Contractor's vertical architecture circumvents the need to demolish existing buildings. The 8 new towers are placed over the 2 extant water channels, with a series of 50 small, ornate lotus-shaped flowers making their appearance. It is worth noting that the lotus first made an appearance in the Mughal gardens of the British Viceroy's house, which is now the Rashtrapati Bhavan. The gardens took their present form as a result of collaboration between Lutyens and English horticulturist William Mustow in 1928. In contractors' hands, a century later, the lotus finds itself replicated as a national emblem in a heavy-handed way along the 3-kilometer waterways of the Rajpath. This obsession with the India's national flower does not end with the fountains. The lotus, which has emerged as the logo of Modi's ruling party, takes center stage in the hexagonal land parcel of Lutyens' master plan, consisting of the India Gate, the canopy, and the All India War Memorial. An unfurled lotus-shaped geometric plan radiates from the center of the hexagon, with small petals transforming into what appear to be tourist shops, visitor pavilions, and an additional 12 larger petals forming colossal water bodies. This is the setting for a gargantuan star-like object that dwarfs the 3 existing monuments left in its shadow. The water bodies are studded like a tiara, with larger versions of the lotus fountains running along the channels. Furthermore, the lotus motif is continued in the flooring patterns at the center of the new tower clusters, leaving the spectator to wonder whether this florid redundancy is a sign of contractors' allegiance to India's national party. An entirely different approach is offered by INI Design Studio and HCP, as their projects maximize the available land to increase public spaces and improve the visual appearance of the central vista. Where INI design is concerned, the landscape includes hierarchically arranged plazas along the Rajpath at 3 scales. First, the ceremonial plaza at the urban scale. Second, public plazas at the cluster scale. And third, landscape plazas at the building scale. Furthermore,
the space between Parliament House and the Rashtrapati Bhavan is envisaged as a ceremonial plaza where observances of national importance such as the beating retreat shall take place. This will be a signature public plaza placed strategically between the Parliament House and the Rashtrapati Bhavan, bringing the people in the heart of this monumental space.
What stands out the most is INI Design's treatment of the Vijay Chowk at the urban scale. It is interesting that the video calls attention to the beating retreat ceremony, which is an annual military ritual with origins dating back to 6th century England that today marks the end of Republic Day celebrations. The beating retreat ceremony to this day takes place in the Vijay Chowk in front of the north and south blocks, flanked by the central vista on one side and the Rashtrapati Bhavan on the other. What is currently a traffic intersection is reimagined as a vibrant public space with a manicured site that includes both hard and soft landscapes. The intention to increase public spaces is also evident in HCP's post-bid proposal, which adds 75 more acres of public space in the central vista to commemorate 75 years of Indian independence, a rather literal means of inscribing political time into measurement. HCP and INI Design reflect the ambition to portray transparency by utilizing landscape design to increase public accessibility in the central vista, thereby bridging the gap between official functions and public leisure activities. In a third and likewise utility-driven approach, CPKA proposes
extending the master plan down to the banks of the Yamuna, reconnecting the Rajpath with nature and creating a vista that runs from the river in the east to the ridge in the west. Doing so will extend the Rajpath's grandeur while laying the framework for an adaptable smart city.
This strategy of connecting the river to ridge is particularly interesting, since it functions as more than simply a link between 2 distinct geographical features through landscape intervention. In fact, it foregrounds the deep contradiction posed by the inherent Indianness of the river and the apparent imperialness of the colonial architecture. Furthermore, by creating an uninterrupted green space in the heart of New Delhi, CPKA achieves its goal of layering by proposing 2 semi-public streets that run between the new Secretariat buildings and sinking the lateral roads to free Rajpath of traffic. This radically transforms the Rajpath into a pedestrian zone. As a result of this move, the space between the new Secretariat buildings and water channels is mediated by stepped garden terraces, which connect the building plinths to the ground level. These gardens, overlooking the Rajpath and weirdly animated in the video as touristic spaces with hot air balloons in the background, also serves as cover over a new tram system below ground. Additionally, roofscapes in CPKA's proposal reduce the heat flow created by the four clusters of the Central Secretariat and become an architectural feature that attempts to integrate, as we shall now see in the next section, a new parliament into what is an overpowering colonial context. When the Council House was created, it was a colonial entity resulting from the Government of India Act of 1919 passed by the British Parliament. By that point, the foundations and basements of the two secretariats had already been built. There was no space for a legislative building on the hill, and so a new site close to the secretariats was finalized. Lutyens suggested that a circular form would be best suited for the equilateral triangular site. What was in fact designed as a circular building consisted of three chambers: the Legislative Assembly, the Council of States, and the Council of Princes, with each spaced at equal angles around a central dome, 90 feet in diameter, which was to be used as a common library for members of all three houses. As Baker wrote, the building was meant to express the essential unity of the three estates represented by the three chambers. Lutyens and Baker delivered a design that, although served as a seat of power for imperial India, did not create within itself a spatial hierarchy that prioritized an individual office or a specific political body. If a schematic diagram of the council chamber was to be made, it would be best represented by three equal-sized spatial bubbles, laid out as vertices of a triangle, equidistant from each other, connected by a central node, and inscribed within the circle. It is important to underscore the schema in order to better situate the evolution of a new parliament building in the Central Vista project. Today, India is a democratic parliamentary republic that functions as a two-chamber structure instead of the colonial three-chamber structure, which operates under a bicameral legislature framework comprised of two houses, the Rajya Sabha and the Lok Sabha. This dual parliamentary composition not only plays an important role in the governance of the nation, but also in the spatial conception of its architecture. When the Government of India claimed the council chamber as its parliament house, it reappropriated the three imperial chambers to serve as the Lok Sabha, the Rajya Sabha, and the library. The central dome space became the common hall for joint sessions. The condensation of a three-chamber colonial system into a two-chamber parliamentary system offered architects an opportunity to reinterpret the original schematic diagram devised by Lutyens and Baker in the design of the new parliament. In the Central Vista project, 5 out of 6 proposals either adopt the colonial diagram or create a novel schema with only 2 spatial compartments. The first set of firms, which we shall now see, are those that inherit the colonial diagram. Both HCP and CPKA position the new parliament in the equilateral triangular plot mirroring the existing land parcel on which the current building is located, which is right here. HCP takes as a starting point the same layout as Lutyens and Baker, except that the new parliament is inscribed within a triangular form. The 3 sections are occupied by the Lok Sabha, the Rajya Sabha, and a courtyard, all of these connected to a central foyer. In a recent presentation of the post-bid proposal, HCP's director Bimal Patel explained that, quote, "Our ambition is to make architecture such that at least from a distance, they, the old and the new parliament, seem like they are completely of the same family. But when you come near, you realize that the building is new. It's more sophisticated, it's sharper," unquote. Taken at face value, the citation reveals a strange role of architectural vision in the explanation of the historical transition from colonial to post-independence political conditions. As the viewer moves closer, what is described is a change in perception from homology to difference. This is as remarkable as it is peculiar, and HCP is the only firm to adopt this conception of the emergence of India's national identity. In order to establish an initial familial resemblance between the 2 parliaments from a distance, HTP focuses on several aspects of the elevation. First, employing an identical vocabulary of architectural elements like the colonnade. Second, matching heights with the existing parliament at key levels like the plinth and roof. Third, using the same types of sandstone for external cladding. And fourth, introducing a new central spire corresponding to the old central dome. In a carefully calibrated balancing act, HTP's new parliament neither makes an attempt to distinguish itself from the colonial context, nor becomes overshadowed by the architectural ghosts of Lutyens and Baker. Instead, the new parliament arguably asserts itself as a contemporary design equal by following the rules established by its neighbors' imperial ancestors, all the while continuing to deploy a pragmatic approach of maximizing occupancy, reconfiguring circulation, and upgrading technology. Some might feel that these are the traits of an architectural approach that remains subservient to the demands of an imperial context. And by not proposing a radically new scheme for the new parliament, HTP is squandering an opportunity to make a grand architectural statement. However, one could also argue that HTP's approach can be read as an act of knowledge and maturity. And though perhaps lacking in innovation, it acknowledges the deeply familiar visual image of India's temple of democracy, all the while resisting the creation of an entirely new visual identity that might not be recognizable. CPKA's design for the new parliament also emerges from the colonial diagram, but unlike HTP, can be described as potentially iconic and emphatically not rooted in Indian culture. Referring to one of its 6 key aspects of their proposal, blend with nature, the voiceover elaborates as follows.
New Delhi was created as a garden city. Our vision carries on this legacy by ensuring that the natural and built environments blend seamlessly with one another. The new Parliament building rises up out of the earth, allowing the green belt of the Rajpath to flow across its roof, making the new and old Parliament harmoniously speak to each other without attempting to overpower the other.
What emerges is a parametric form with 3 arms that blur the boundary between the ground and the roof as they converge in the center towards a giant oculus, corresponding to the central dome of the existing parliament. And this is where global influences emerge, for CPKA's new parliament bears an uncanny resemblance to the Ferrari World in Abu Dhabi, the well-known theme park designed in 2010 by the global design firm Biome. As the world's largest space frame structure, the Ferrari World is exponentially bigger than the new parliament, but is likewise anchored around a central oculus. The video shows the new parliament as an illuminated landscape ornament that radiates a white glow through its 3 glass facades, bearing the national emblem and the national motto, thereby creating an iconic image in which signs become something akin to a commercial branding. In a way, CPKA meets its own goal of harmoniously relating to the existing parliament without attempting to overpower it by proposing a monument that reads less as an architectural edifice and more as an extended landscape of the central vista. The second set of firms entirely reject the colonial diagram and instead create a novel schema for the new parliament that reflects the constituent houses forming the post-independence parliamentary structure. Among these, Ini Design Studio describes its proposal as:
the new Parliament House is envisioned in the form of 2 elliptical blocks accommodating the 2 respective houses of the Parliament, the Lok Sabha and the Rajya Sabha. These blocks come together to give a framed and lucid view of the Rashtrapati Bhavan. The tall columns around them bind the blocks together, representing the people of India at the helm of the Indian democracy. The glass facade and the clear roof of the blocks showcases the transparency in the processes.
The emergent form, a far less imaginative version of what could have easily been mistaken for a temporary exposition pavilion, stands in the middle of the central vista as a porous hall that utilizes the walls of the new Rajya Sabha and Lok Sabha as what seem like LED panels to boast about the accomplishments of the Indian cricket team. Ini Design's composition of materials results in the oversimplified conception of a very complex program. While it is certainly not erroneous to let sustainability be a key aspect of the project, it takes precedence over the building program and, in the eyes of many, compromises on the opportunity to truly create an image that reflects an architectural rigor. Indeed, the very placement of a new parliament is a radical choice, but perhaps came at the cost of an overtly abstract edifice that stands out in the stark contrast to its context, contradicting any design studio's own claim that the architectural language blends the modern design with its context. The final two parliaments by SAA and RCOP share a couple of similar features among them. First, they are located in the same equilateral triangular plots of land, thereby symmetrically corresponding to the location of the existing parliament. And second, they both follow the same formal layout. Two circular cylinders parallel to the axis of the Rajpath with a common central space in the center. The absence of a textual description and voiceover leaves much to speculation about these interventions. The seemingly straightforward secular brief for the Central Vista project solicited a wide range of proposals. Some were convoluted, politically charged, and immersed in implicit religious frenzy, whereas others were pragmatic, technologically advanced, and divested from political propaganda. The project offers itself as a testimony to the complex nexus of contemporary architecture, urban planning, political power, and national identity, all of which are deeply rooted in the already complicated colonial past. This entanglement brings to light the various scales at which a new national identity is conceived, from the macrocosm of urban planning to the microcosm of elements like fountains and lattices. The creation of a new visual image is not restricted by the extent of size, shape, color, or form. But the multimediatic videos, with their inclusion of speech, music, photography, and animation, make possible the exploration at various scales and address the issue of audience accessibility directly as they deploy a filmic narrative to engage the non-specialist viewer in the apprehension of design proposals. Yet, the general public reaction and subsequent controversies were almost completely instigated by the representation of the urban locale imagined by the finalists, thereby reinforcing the power of video as a means of not only accessing stakeholders who would have otherwise not been privy to the design process, but also presenting them with deceptively finished urban settings. The fictional linearity of these choreographed events undoubtedly allows for all 6 walkthrough movies to construct differently seamless narratives, as some focus more on presenting a fleeting spectacle, whereas others follow a rational approach to the sequential layout. In the end, they underscore the agency of the architect in re-envisioning the political realm through design, and how, misleading or not, design itself can construe the image of a nation. Thank you.
Vaishnavi, thank you for a very interesting and introspective presentation. With this, we would like to invite our second designer, Ishita, to share her presentation.
Hello, everyone. I hope you are able to hear me. Just let me know if there's any issue. So as I would have expected, it has started raining in Bangalore, which means I'm working on hotspot now. Power is off. And this is very usual. So if I get disconnected, don't worry, I'll be back. That's all I can say right now. Again, if that's not visible, do let me know. Thank you, Varna. Thank you, Design United team, as well as ClayWorks Space for hosting this interesting dialogue. And as Vaishnavi said, it's interesting more so because we have our own history, and then we both have a lot of architectural and design history to talk about. So where Vaishnavi stopped for me is almost, let's say, start of where my career began. So I'm literally jumping the timescape for all of you to show what could happen and what all is possible when you engage with areas of history theory and criticism. Where I see myself now, as it was said in the introduction as well, is a curator for cultural action. And mostly my work has been in the areas of historical or cultural preservation, but with a very strong intent for creative opportunities as well as community engagement. Now, what do I mean by all of this? I'm going to take you through selected projects and hopefully explain or tie all of it together. If it doesn't make sense, is why you can ask me more questions. Usually do this, or rather I prefer this to start with credits, because my practice or the kind of work I refer to is really a collective of so many people and so many different practices coming together from various different disciplines, various different walks of life. So there are scientists here, there are architects, there is UI UX designer, there's a scholar, there are NGOs, there are institutions, there are architectural offices, right? So all the work that you see henceforth in the presentation is credits to all of these people. So how for today, at least I've positioned my conversation is around three very key aspects to my practice, which is documentation, dialogue, and dissemination. And this photograph from my times at CEPT Archives, I think very late when I was about to leave, sort of combines it all, right? So there is documentation in many ways, there is a dialogue happening, and there is an act of dissemination in Joanna's work, is why she's actually documenting it. I'm not getting into these definitions. I just wanted to use this slide to sort of give you a sense of how I'm going to play with these words. And there's this no sense of sequence, which I'm going to emphasize on. So the first project I want to take you through is Contesting Heritage. It is an open studio, which we had floated for the Shishti Postgraduate Interlude in 2017. What it was about questioning heritage conservation and preservation practices. It was about looking for newer spaces for intervention and allowing for more forms of interpretation to seep in. What it entailed, it was about 4-week-long studio. We had about 4 sites for our students. These are very contested, highly contested sites, from Hampi, Yanegundi to Manipal Heritage Village. We had Jog Falls in north of Karnataka, and we had, which one am I forgetting? Fourth one, Hampi, Jog Falls, and Jewtown. Yeah, so Jewtown, Fort Kochi. And these are postgraduate students, so they were on their own, but what we worked on as curators or facilitators with me, Srijan and Sriparna, was to program. How do you program such a learning experience? And how do you make sure the key aspects of community engagement, mapping various possibilities, and raising critical inquiries is sort of constantly scaffolded for, so that the student teams can make it work. And the idea was that in 4 weeks you can't resolve the problem of a town or a village. But the need was then to sort of take this documentation into form of a dialogue, and hence the outcome at least was governed towards these 2 very strong endpoints. One was the conference at New Delhi, ICOMOS Global Assembly 2007 by Shishti at IISc for Shishti Interlude. And these 2 spaces were at the student team's disposal to talk to a wide variety of practitioners about their issues, about their responses. What they ended up doing is they became the voice, they became the mediators between what is happening on the ground and what the world knows, and what are the different perspectives, what are the different voices. So what you see on the left is one of the ways of presentation about the situation at Hampi, where the student team wanted to show that there are so many different perspectives and the community's voice is not taken into consideration when you think about heritage planning and management. Whereas on the right side, what you see is more of a game of cards, which was about showing how the community is involved in looking after the synagogues in Jewtown, but there is no management, there is no authority, which sort of is hand-holding the project. What I also wanted to show is a video clip, but I'm going to skip this right now, given that internet is a concern. What this video clip is basically taking us to is the final form of dissemination, which is where one of the teams working in Jewtown actually created a poetic collage, if I call it, about their research and about their documentation of the houses in Jewtown through the perspective of a window and the different lives that a window has lived through. We'll perhaps try towards the end to play it. The second project, I'm really going to jump things and perhaps confuse you all also, but bear with me. So lab culture, this happened last year. This is a space where one was trying to curate across 4 different disciplines, which is art, science, history, and technology. And over here, the intention was to sort of bring out the work that happens, or the life or the culture that are sort of is inherent at NCBS, National Center for Biological Sciences, one of the premier institutions in the country, which works on fundamental research in biology, and hence the need for a cultural dialogue. So this 2-part exhibition sort of found its genesis in the idea of dialogue first, right? So in the previous project, sorry, I missed to explain, but the first step was very obvious, which we all do, which we go to a site, we document, then then we take it into a dialogue, and then we disseminate it. But over here, it was the other way around. We needed to speak with each lab, participating lab, understand their science, work with them to create the prototypes. From us, they are understanding the art and design part of it. And there's a constant exchange between different teams. And I think there are about 10 and about 2. So there were 12 teams in total, which are cross-communicating. That led to some form of a documentation, and why I use the word over here is very crucial, and you can even read the text. But what happens is in this collaboration, the artist comes in while we are the curators, Netra and I. The artist comes in with a very fresh perspective, not necessarily engaging with the science as it is, but they want to document, they want to represent the science through the way they engage with it, through the way they understand. So they went into, so the top image is in process work by Naveen, one of the artists, and the bottom image on the right is the final work by Yash Bhandari. And they both have their own ways of documenting and representing what NCBS and the science means to the whole cultural narrative. Whereas the image on the left is where we are opening up archives at NCBS and trying to map the narrative of NCBS, what made NCBS what it is today, from the history of TIFR, sorry, all the way from history of Homi Bhabha to TIFR to different other organizations and institutions in the times of Nehru, and then finally you arrive at what is NCBS today. This finally leads to another act of dissemination, which we all in common language obviously call an exhibition. But such an exhibition then meant what are the different ways that you can disseminate or you can engage with? Who are your different audiences? Who would need a walkthrough? Who would want to engage by themselves? So you start programming even those aspects of the exhibition and not just leave it at the spatial design or the graphic design aspects of it. So the first 2 images on the top is Lab Culture 1, which is first 5 labs which were curated together. And the second image is Lab Culture 2, which is the next 5 labs. These were on for about 3 months each, same space. The third project I want to sort of open up is Biome Diaries. It's an ongoing project, something most of you might want to watch out for, where it's another mainstream archiving, interpreting, and publishing project, very similar to my roots back at CEPT Archives, but very specifically about a practice, which is biome environmental solutions, sorry, which is a collaborative practice of Chitra Vishwanath and Vishwanath Shrikantha, architect and planner, respectively. And what one is trying to do over here is take it beyond their architectural and design exercise, take it into the everyday life and talk about ecological consciousness, which has been their the genesis of their work. Again, so you go through the whole idea of documentation, from photo shooting to video recording to listing down the different projects, filtering it out, but also creating an in-house archive, right? So how do you sort, organize, and sift through projects? What material is important to the story? What is not? How do we prioritize? How do we filter? And what is the information architecture that is important? From there, again, dialogue became very crucial because, as I said, we wanted to situate this project into everyday life, into the mainstream, and not leave it only exclusively for architects and designers. So over here we went through about 36 to 40 interviews or oral history sessions with clients, architects, contractors, clients within Bangalore, but also outside of Bangalore, and other key members of the project. So this finally is going to lead to two forms of dissemination project. One is, obviously you will find some books out soon, so watch out for it. These are just suggestive images, but also a digital archive again, because one understands that you're looking at a voluminous amount of data which you have researched, which you have articulated, which you have organized, out of which you are interpreting and using out, let's say, few hundred pages to read. Which will be sort of pocket friendly, which will be in the form of a story. So what are the other ways that you can engage with this archive? And hence the need for a digital archive or a space through which researchers can engage. So that's one. The fourth project is design dialogues. I hope I am keeping to time. If anybody wants to stop me, please do let me know. Design dialogues is a platform where we sort of facilitate public engagement. So all these conversations about culture, creativity, which otherwise we constantly sort of strive to make it inclusive, and the real inclusivity lies in when perhaps public starts engaging with it. Of course, the definition of public always remains complicated. These conversations are anchored around various issues, but the logic is to also bridge the cultural and the creative together to make sure that we find answers or we find ways for creative resolution about the issues we raise. It's basically co-curated with my colleague Rahul Bisht, who majorly handles visualizing and keeping me on check of a lot of things, whereas I moderate and sort of curate the dialogues. So here, the process completely flips. The idea is to first disseminate, right? So you start with dissemination. So we have had about 11 dialogues until now in 1.5 years. And from subjects like marginalization to play of knowledge systems, to orchestrating playfulness, to programming for communities, and coming weekend, which is tomorrow and day after, we're talking about unlocking your networks post-COVID. So you are responding to the current situation, but you are also, as I said, trying to make it more relevant to public at large. Hence, we also try and reach out to speakers and mentors who need not fall into any one of these silos of architecture, design, graphics, furniture, but people who have had multiple practices or multiple identities. And from there, again, the format of a dialogues has also been something that we have played around with. So it doesn't have to be a stage, a dais, and then an audience listening to it, but rather more like a round table, as you see in this image when we were talking to Dinesh and Suresh about marginalization. Whereas when we did orchestrating playfulness, we almost went hands-on, started making places and making pop-up spaces to engage with. So what are the different ways that one can dialogue in? And this is why perhaps I felt the need to sort of define dialogue or dissemination or documentation, because these words themselves can be interpreted in many more ways. And what happens in this project is documentation is the last leg of it, because you realize you're creating rich set of information. You want it to be available. You want it to be engaged with. So came in the design dialogues blog when Rahul sort of insisted, and Shreya and Ananthan joined the team voluntarily, and they have been creating raw videos and also editing the photographs and editing the material to make sure that anybody and everybody who visits the Design Dialogue WordPress can understand what the idea was, simplifying it and making it available as easily as possible. This is the final project. Just wanted to be as much in real time as possible when I take you through a bit of a longer journey. And archiving family histories is something that I tried in the 4 weeks of lockdown. It was literally just an epiphany I had in the first week of lockdown when I said, oh, what are people going to do in their houses? Let's connect them back with their own histories. And to my surprise, I ended up curating 3 long sessions, not just one. It covers aspects of archiving, narrative building, and oral history recording. The idea was to make it interactive. The idea was to make it project-based learning experiences. And again, age was no bar, discipline was no bar. So if you had a laptop and if you had interest in family archiving, you are on board. This led to, again, a different process. So because it's project-led and it's project-led experience, the idea of dissemination again comes in first. So each participant would think about what they wanted to do with their family history. Somebody wanted to create story about women and migration, as you see in the right top image, whereas Aparna wanted to talk about the left bottom image. She wanted to use her grandmother's stories to create an artistic project, whereas the right corner bottom image is Ninad trying to document his family's family temple's history and make it a community project, right? So you're starting with already a plan to do something with it. What that led to obviously was a need to document. Now these ideas are there, but the material is lying in many different places across their families, across their relatives. Some of these participants were not even there at their own houses. So reaching back to their families and looking for this material. Photographs, but Vallabhi also chooses to sort of start drawing it herself and documenting it through more live mediums, the games that her grandmother talks about, whereas Rupal is looking at photographs. A lot of maps came out, a lot of old objects of their families were pulled out. And oral history or narrative building being one of the key aspects of subverting the colonial institutional way of archiving, which comes sort of through my practice or the insistence of the way I look at archiving and narrative building. Dialoguing became the outcome of this exercise. So what you're seeing is sort of an output of the dialogues that the participants have had with their family members. So the first image on your left is an output of Niyati having multiple conversations with her family member, with her mother, if I remember, yes, her mother. And these are the sketches that are an output of those conversations, whereas the right side image is Vallabhi drawing out the old house, almost in resonance with the way her grandmother sort of narrates it to her. So they basically ended up doing, I think each participant tried about 2 to 3 recordings in a span of 10 days. And the whole idea was how many more such stories could they collect? And what would it do to their understanding of documentation and thus dissemination of the project? So going back stepwards. Again, I wanted to play the video, a clip of Vallabhi's grandmother speaking, but I'm going to skip that. The rains are quite heavy here. Just quickly trying to tie it up, what I wanted to take you through and why I picked these 5 projects out of the mammoth of work that I could think of is because I wanted to take you through what I mean when you say curate for culture, that you could work with so many different formats: public engagement, digital engagement, consultation, exhibition design, educational, as well as what Vaishnavi showed and what I have done initial years in my career is write a research paper, make an academic presentation, and build your arguments, but also build and allow for more creative practices to grow out of your engagement with history, theory, and criticism. So that's about it from my end. Thank you.
Ishita, thank you so much for taking us through your varied and interesting work and projects on documentation, archival, and curating. I'm sure the audience will have a lot of questions too. So with this, we thank both our speakers, Vaishnavi and Ishita, for their interesting presentations, and we open our session for conversation. We invite the audience to please share your questions for the presenters. Please type in your questions for Vaishnavi and Ishita, and kindly also leave feedback. With that, I would like to introduce and welcome our moderators for the conversation today, architects Devi Nair and Sushma V. Devi joins us from Oman today, where she is working on planning projects before she starts her research master's this September at the Yale School of Architecture. Sushma joins us from Bangalore. She is a research architect at NIT Bangalore, where she recently completed an assignment to digitally reconstruct the tangible and intangible heritage of Hampi. This project was funded by the Department of Science and Technology, Government of India. So I now open the session for both the speakers and moderators. Thank you.
Hi, guys. Thank you, Vaishnavi and Ishita, for your very engaging and thought-provoking presentations. To kind of give you, a slight background, I connected with Vaishnavi a few months back, and more recently with Ishita. And I have to tell you that, I found the paths that you have both taken extremely inspiring. So I think we'd like to kind of, touch upon that aspect, your process, and also speak a bit about, the gender voice in this dialogue. But before we start, Vaishnavi, I'd like to start with you. Beyond a visual or a dissemination perspective, how, in your opinion, has the project of Central Vista addressed, the needs of the country during these turbulent times?
I think before we kind of address that, I think it's important to acknowledge that the project actually started, way back in 2014, before the present government came into power. There were a couple of proposals floated by the Ministry of Urban Affairs, just saying that with the ratio that the Parliament needs to maintain between the representation of each individual to the population, the current Parliament was anyways smaller. I mean, going to become much smaller based on the future needs of the project. So given that as like the underlying theme, the project started based out of need, and the dissemination happened because of the medium of representation. It's interesting the toll it's taken now, because regardless of whatever the country is going through, the project seems to be marching forward, which is a whole different conversation. But I guess in response to your question, it's perhaps as of today maybe not as cognizant of the turbulent times, but it emerged out of a more kind of practical need of just spatial requirements.
Thank you, Vaishnavi. Sushma, would you like to continue?
Yeah. Hi, both of you. It was a great presentation. And this question is for both of you. As both of you have each trained as a designer and historian, could you tell us something about the process and evolution that has occurred in your individual career to where you stand today, given that there may be not much of a reference point to go by? And perhaps also give us a sneak peek into what you have garnered introspectively thus far.
Ishita, you want to go first? You definitely have.
I'll let you continue, Vaishnavi.
It's interesting. I mean, I perhaps don't really. I mean, I'm just starting out. I just graduated yesterday. The interest in just studying history theory came from the fact that CEPT has a very intensive hands-on undergraduate architecture, and in doing studios, you kind of seldom, your theoretical skills and your philosophical understanding takes a little backseat, and it's much to do with hands-on skill development and thought development. So it's a very different process, which is why when I was applying to grad school, I was very clear that I did not want to do a studio, because studio takes away a lot of your energy, and just focus on courses that really cultivate thought processing and just the way you look at different things and the way you look at like the world altogether. And just the fact that design doesn't exist in isolation, that studio often tends to do, and that design is always interlinked with other different fields that kind of are existing simultaneously, which in real life is all the more evident. That's where I stand. I wouldn't call myself a historian as yet. I don't know where it's gonna go next, but that's where I come from. Ishita's definitely is way more interesting. So I think, yeah, I would love.
I don't know if I remained a historian, I would put it like that. I started off to be one. I think I have a very similar reasoning, is that the program we both, even though we are different schools at CEPT, interior design and architecture, the experience is similar, that you go through this rigorous studio. There was space for critical questioning, I won't deny that, but I think I'll leave it to how much it is really entertained and how much it is responded to. And I think I was very keen on writing about architecture and design critically, which I felt even those days, which is now, I'm talking 10 years, 14 years back, was something that needed to be questioned. The publication, the material that came out, the kind of exposure we all had to literary material about architecture and design, Indian architecture and design, I should emphasize on that. So you always found the material to be much more descriptive rather than analytical, rather than critical, rather than comparative, responding to what's happening in the world, what's happening in other disciplines. So that's what was going on in my head. Sarath, I agree, there weren't many reference points, except for one or two of my seniors who had pursued history theory, but not done much with it. So I still went on blank. Beyond that, Sushma, I think my answer to building a practice or a career has been to say, let's just do it. So what I'm referring to is, when things came your way, the idea was to say, yes, let's do it. It would sort of seep into you and creep you out that, oh my God, I'm doing this also, I'm doing that also. And, we all have this impression that the trajectory has to be very focused, has to be very linear, A to Z. Those things do seep in, and then you learn to sort of sit back, interpret your own work, critically look at it, and tie it back together. If you have done things which sort of are an offshoot, you allow them to be an offshoot and nurture, and hence don't sort of hold on to or stick to saying, oh, I'm only an architectural historian, or I'm only a design historian, I only do this much. You allow for more fields to sort of seep into your practice and vice versa.
Thank you.
Ishita, you have spoken about indigenous communities, your work with indigenous communities, which was part of your archiving work or your narratives. So considering that we are at a turning point, literally as a collective, we're looking back to traditional knowledge systems. Do you perceive that the relevance of history, preservation, and subjects that at one point were not given that kind of an importance, has that gained momentum? What do you think?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I sort of have to give credit to the fact that for me, it has been quite timely that this kind of an awareness, or this going back to the traditional indigenous practices, perhaps as a mainstream, because I do know a lot of people were writing about it even 20 years back, but perhaps as a mainstream where most of the educational institutions or practices started looking back at it, has happened in the last 10 to 15 years. And for me, that is why sort of it becomes timely that I could also situate my practice in the same space, because it was a burning topic for me as well. So yes, the need to then understand history, theory, preservation are so relevant, because when we say traditional knowledge systems, especially India and some of the South Asian cities, which I at least am aware of, they all are working with informal knowledge systems. They have been working with informal knowledge systems. They are not recorded. They are not available as books. They're not available as publications. So your need to dwell into historical archival methods, sort of even innovate them, to be able to go back into time, recreate these memories, and make it available, make it more relevant to times today, is completely a new creative practice which needs to be looked out for.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think at some point, this could be something that young graduates can inspire to, because as of now, this is a field that's just kind of taking relevance now. So I hope that happens. Sushma, you can.
Yeah, this is for both of you. As we know that the gender issue has been on the table for quite a long time now, do you feel that the female voice is lacking in Indian architectural practice today, or where do you see the female gender being positioned in today's art and architecture scenario? Could you tell us something about your experiences in the field that can help us understand the gender issue?
Ishita, go for it.
Vaishnavi, your turn. Your turn.
Yes, it's lacking. Um, but yes, there's also hope, and there have been a lot of changes. I mean, look at people in this seminar right now, we are all women.
Yeah.
Look at the changing ratio in studios, look at the changing ratio of um, people who teach architecture, people who practice architecture. So yes, coming from I don't know, a background where I had female mentors and I had people I could look up to. That gap was all the more kind of emphasized when I came to the US, which you would expect is more liberal, but it's not. You literally have to advocate to get a seat at the table, which is what a lot of my work as a co-chair of the student organization Women in Design here had to do with. So I feel like it's that dialogue has taken center stage, but we're not there yet. I don't know if it makes sense. Like the movement has started, but we still need to push through. So I'm optimistic. I mean, we're getting there.
Yeah, I think I'm equally optimistic. Is simply again because I'm going to give a sense of the trajectory I have seen over 15 or 20 years into the discipline, and it obviously feels we've come a long way. Whether it's in terms of teaching, whether it's in terms of recognizing architectural and art practices led by women, but also led by male and female partners, and where the female architects or designers' name is not left out anymore, to actually having forums and discussions where women representation is assured. So lesser and lesser manels is what we see, both internationally and nationally. But this dialogue, I think, needs to now seep in across what is happening across education and practice. And this is something which was very eye-opening with Rahul and Ranjit Hoskote and Kaiwan's exhibition, where when you see the numbers of the students graduating, and then when you see the number of practitioners, I really have the question for women students or women practitioners: where are you? And I'm not trying to be very philosophical over here. I'm genuinely questioning, because we all are going through each of our struggles, and I want to know what are their personal narratives. And this sort of, again, I'm connecting it back to the recent symposium, one of its kind, by Madhvi-ben and Anuradha and Kush, which was around gender and academic leadership, hosted by Avni Institute. First or the second in the country, which is talking about gender. And what I came through, what I sort of learned through those presentations was that there is a need for personal voice. It's not anymore about women as a collective or men as a collective, but really allowing for more and more individual narratives to come out, so that we make space for more genders also. Because again, we're then working only with binaries, and there is so much more to talk about when it comes to queer or trans. So not leading to more marginalization of any other community, but allowing for a more equity or more equitarian space for everybody. And hence the question is, what's happening between education and practice? Where are we all getting digressed or lost?
I think it's more of an individual narrative after some point of time. So we should do well.
Yes. Yeah. Yes, we should, totally.
Guys, I think unfortunately we're running short on time, but we can continue this conversation on Instagram. So I would like to thank both of you for coming in, and yeah, so I guess we'll move on to Instagram after this. Okay.
Thank you, presenters, moderators, audience, ClayWorks, and the DU team for your time and really inspired questions and feedback. The questions and the discussion can totally continue on our Instagram page with Vaishnavi, Ishita, moderators. So have a great evening and a great weekend. See you next week on Saturday at 4:30 p.m. Priyanka from our Design United team will share the upcoming series of events.
Hi, I am Priyanka Shelke, an intern with VSLA and a member of the Design United team. So far, Design United has successfully finished 7 installments of Design Conversation, and we have many more exciting speakers and events lined up, with designers across the spectrum joining us to share their thoughts. Next week, we have Eugene Cosgroen from Singapore and Studio and Build from Mumbai joining us to discuss their design practice and approach. So make sure to join us next Friday for the same. Design United as a platform is a collaborative, and we encourage everybody to collaborate with us, volunteer with us, and help us with the Design United community. We hope that you will follow us on Instagram to stay updated about all our upcoming events and speakers, and also stay tuned so that we can continue this conversation with Ishita and Vaishnavi on our Instagram page and answer all your unanswered questions. Thank you.